10,000 years ago, on the shores of Lake Turkana, a pregnant woman sat bound and helpless as arrows flew overhead. Her unborn child would never take a breath. Forget everything Hollywood has taught you about prehistoric battles. No epic sword fights or heroic speeches. The real story is far darker, more brutal, and more calculated than any movie could show. Today, we're diving deep into humanity's oldest recorded violence, uncovering the brutal truth about our ancestors and the origins of war. Chapter 1. Echoes from the Stone Age. Long before the first civilizations rose, before the first cities were built or the first empires fell, violence had already left its mark on humanity. It's easy to believe that war is a product of organized society, something that emerged only when people began to settle, farm, and compete for land. But archaeological evidence suggests otherwise. The earliest echoes of violence don't come from battlefields, but from deep within caves, buried alongside our most ancient ancestors. One of the most chilling clues comes from a site in northern Spain known as Cima de los Huesos, or the Pit of Bones. Hidden deep within this cave system, archaeologists discovered the remains of at least 28 individuals, estimated to be over 430,000 years old. Among these ancient bones was a skull, cataloged as cranium-17, that would quietly redefine our understanding of prehistoric conflict. This skull didn't just bear the wear of time, it carried the unmistakable marks of violence. 2 deliberate, nearly identical fractures appeared on its frontal bone, evidence that this individual had likely been struck twice in the face with the same object. Forensic analysis ruled out accidental trauma. This was not a fall. This was not scavenger damage. It was an intentional act, lethal force delivered in close quarters. In other words, it was murder. At over 400,000 years old, cranium-17 is currently the earliest known case of interpersonal violence in the human fossil record. And while it may represent an isolated incident, it raises a deeper, more disturbing question. Just how far back does violence go in our evolutionary story? This wasn't Homo sapiens. This was an earlier hominin species. And yet, even then, the instinct to harm, perhaps out of anger, fear, or competition, was already present. But there's a crucial difference between a murder and a war. One involves individuals, the other, entire groups. The real turning point in human violence wasn't when one person killed another. It was when communities began targeting other communities, when violence became strategic, organized, and collective. And, for years, scientists believed that this shift only happened after humans began settling into agricultural societies, where competition over land and resources would naturally escalate into conflict. But this idea has been challenged by evidence that suggests humans may have begun organized violence much earlier than previously thought. The question that haunts archaeologists is, when did we cross that line? When did we first form groups not just to hunt or survive, but to kill other groups like us? The clues to this mystery are scattered, often fragmentary, and always open to interpretation. But they're slowly painting a picture of a far more violent past than we once believed. We see hints in the arrangement of bones, in the placement of weapons, in wounds that tell a story more deliberate than random death. These are not easy conclusions to reach. In archaeology, we rarely get the full scene. Instead, we piece together ancient lives from broken remains. But cranium-17 stands as a grim reminder that violence is not a modern invention. It's embedded deep in our past. It's not just a product of politics or power struggles. It's part of our biology, present even before our species fully emerged. And if individuals from hundreds of thousands of years ago were capable of such deliberate, lethal actions, then it opens the door to a darker, more complex understanding of what it means to be human. Perhaps the capacity for violence didn't evolve with civilization, it evolved with us. As we move forward in our journey, we'll look at how violence scaled from the individual to the collective, and how one archaeological site in Africa revealed the first signs of prehistoric warfare. The story of human conflict is older and more unsettling than we ever imagined. Chapter 2. The Nataruk Massacre, humanity's first war. In 2012, a team of archaeologists made a discovery that would forever change how we understand violence in early human societies. On the dry, wind-swept shores of Lake Turkana in Kenya, they uncovered the remains of 27 individuals, men, women, and children, scattered across the ground, their skeletons partially exposed, as if frozen in the moment of death. But this was not a burial ground. There were no graves, no ritual placements. This was something far darker. The bodies bore clear, unmistakable signs of trauma. Shattered skulls, broken ribs, crushed cheekbones, and arrowheads lodged deep in bone. One woman was found lying on her side, her hands possibly bound, her belly swollen in late pregnancy. Her unborn child would never draw breath. Another man had a sharp obsidian blade embedded in his chest. Others showed signs of blunt force injuries consistent with clubs or rocks. This was not natural death, nor an isolated murder. It was, by all accounts, a coordinated and deliberate act of group violence, a prehistoric massacre. The site, known as Nataruk, dates back approximately 10,000 years, placing it firmly within the Late Stone Age, a time when humans lived as small, mobile bands of hunter-gatherers. For decades, the dominant theory in anthropology held that warfare, the organized, systematic killing of one group by another, only emerged after the development of agriculture. The logic was simple. Once people began farming, they settled in one place, accumulated food, land, and wealth. And once they had something to lose, conflict was inevitable. But Nataruk turned that theory on its head. These people were not farmers. They lived off the land, likely fishing, hunting, and gathering plants in a rich, resource-abundant environment. There was no famine, no drought. The lake at that time was teeming with life, and yet they were killed, violently, intentionally, and with weapons that weren't designed for hunting animals. Archaeologists noted that the attackers used obsidian-tipped projectiles, a material not native to the immediate area. This strongly suggests that the attackers came from elsewhere, traveling some distance with purpose. Some of the weapons found, such as clubs in varying sizes, hint at strategic planning. The victims, based on their bone injuries and positions, were likely caught off guard. Some may have tried to flee. Others, including children, likely stood no chance. According to Dr. Marta Mirazan-Lar of Cambridge University, who led the excavation, this is the earliest scientifically dated evidence of a massacre among nomadic foragers. It suggests that conflict and violent confrontation between groups has deeper roots in human history than we once thought. What makes the Nataruk massacre particularly important is that it forces us to reconsider what we believe about human nature. For a long time, the popular image of hunter-gatherers was one of harmony with nature, small communities living peacefully, sharing resources with little conflict. But the bones at Nataruk tell a different story. They tell us that even in a time before borders, armies, or organized governments, humans were already capable of premeditated group violence. And, perhaps most disturbingly, the reasons for the attack remain unknown. Were the victims targeted for their resources? Was it retaliation? Was it about territory or something more symbolic? The lack of clear motive makes the massacre even more haunting. Yet, not everyone in the scientific community agrees with this interpretation. A few researchers have proposed alternative explanations, suggesting that the injuries seen in the skeletons could have been caused by post-mortem damage, possibly from soil pressure, animal activity, or erosion. They argue that without direct evidence of the moment of attack, we must be cautious in calling this warfare. However, the positioning of the bodies, the consistent patterns of trauma, and the forensic detail all strongly support the conclusion that this was an act of human-on-human violence. And whether or not we call it war, it was undoubtedly collective targeted killing. The Nataruk site offers a sobering window into the past. It shows us that violence is not simply a product of civilization, it is something that predates it. It challenges the belief that humans were peaceful until society corrupted them. And it suggests that the instinct to defend, to attack, and to eliminate perceived threats may be embedded deep within us, far older than cities, kings, or empires. Nataruk was not an isolated event. It was likely part of a much broader pattern of prehistoric conflict that left few traces behind. But the traces that do remain are powerful enough to force us to ask uncomfortable questions about who we are and who we have always been. Chapter 3. Tools of Death. How weapons shaped human survival. Weapons have always been more than tools. They are extensions of the human mind. Long before the invention of metal, the bow, or the battlefield, early humans were already experimenting with ways to gain an advantage in life or death encounters. The story of prehistoric warfare is also the story of innovation, of how technology transformed survival into domination, and how the development of weapons shaped the course of human evolution. For most of early human history, the primary weapon was simple: the handheld spear. Both Neanderthals and early modern humans used it, but their approach to violence and to hunting was dramatically different. Neanderthals were incredibly strong, using thrusting spears that required them to get dangerously close to large prey. Fossil evidence shows that many suffered serious injuries, likely from close combat with animals. But Homo sapiens, our direct ancestors, began to rely less on brute strength and more on distance, precision, and planning. One of the earliest game changers was the invention of projectile technology, specifically the atlatl, a spear thrower that increased the speed, force, and distance of a thrown spear. But perhaps the most revolutionary weapon of the prehistoric world was the bow and arrow. Light, portable, and deadly from a distance, it fundamentally changed the rules of engagement. Now, early humans could hunt without exposing themselves to danger, and in times of conflict, they could strike silently and lethally before an enemy even knew they were there. The earliest direct evidence of bow use dates back over 60,000 years, with indirect clues going even further back. Arrowheads made from stone, bone, or obsidian have been found on every continent where early humans lived. These weren't crude tools. They were finely crafted, purpose-built instruments designed to kill efficiently. And the choice of material mattered. Obsidian, a volcanic glass, was especially prized. It could be flaked into razor-sharp edges that even today are sharper than surgical steel. But obsidian is rare and doesn't occur everywhere. Its presence in archaeological sites often indicates trade, travel, or long-distance raids. At places like Nataruk, the discovery of obsidian-tipped projectiles not native to the area is a clue. The attackers came prepared, and they brought their best weapons with them. These weren't casual tools. They were tools of war. The presence of multiple weapon types at ancient conflict sites also suggests a degree of tactical planning. Some individuals carried blunt force weapons like clubs, ideal for close combat. Others used ranged weapons, arrows and darts, to weaken targets before engaging. This variety indicates that early humans may have understood basic battlefield roles, some to strike from afar, others to finish the job up close. In other words, strategy was already in play. But weapons were not just about fighting. They were about identity, status, and psychological advantage. In some early societies, carrying certain weapons may have symbolized power or leadership. Decorated spear tips, intricately carved handles, and specialized tools tell us that warfare was not just physical, it was cultural. Weapons also began to influence settlement patterns. Communities that mastered projectile technology could defend themselves more effectively. Those without such tools were more vulnerable to attack or displacement. Over time, this technological gap may have played a crucial role in the survival or extinction of entire groups. And this brings us to one of the most important implications of prehistoric weaponry. It wasn't just used against animals or enemies. It was part of the evolutionary arms race. The ability to make and use better weapons directly impacted a group's ability to survive, reproduce, and expand. In fact, some anthropologists argue that Homo sapiens outcompeted Neanderthals not just because of social cooperation, but because of superior weaponry. While Neanderthals relied heavily on brute force tactics, modern humans used distance weapons, coordinated ambushes, and team strategies to hunt and, when necessary, to fight. This technological edge was not just physical, it was cognitive. Making a bow and arrow requires a sophisticated understanding of materials, aerodynamics, and timing. It also requires planning, foresight, and often cooperation. These mental skills are what separated Homo sapiens from other hominins, and they're the same traits that underpin everything from art to architecture to warfare. In essence, weapons were a catalyst, not only for violence, but for human progress. They demanded innovation, they rewarded intelligence, and they transformed survival into supremacy. So when we look at prehistoric warfare, we're not just seeing brutality, we're seeing the birth of military thinking, the first sparks of strategy, and the tools that allowed our ancestors not just to live, but to win. As we continue our journey, we'll explore not just the tools of war, but the motives behind it. Because behind every weapon lies a reason to use it, whether out of fear, greed, revenge, or something deeper embedded in the human psyche. From the shores of Lake Turkana to ancient caves across the world, one thing is clear: violence is woven into the fabric of human history. The discoveries at Nataruk and beyond reveal that warfare isn't just a product of civilization, it's a part of our very nature. Weapons were more than tools of death. They were symbols of survival, strategy, and evolution. This story is not just about the battles fought outside, it's a reflection of the conflict within us all. Understanding our violent past helps us confront what it means to be human and challenges us to shape a future beyond war. Chapter 4: The Psychology of Conflict. Why we fight. As the trail of prehistoric violence winds deeper into our past, one question looms larger than any bone fragment or arrowhead ever could. Why do humans fight? If the Nataruk Massacre shows us the how of ancient violence, and Cranium 17 shows us the when, then this chapter takes us to the most uncomfortable truth of all: the why. The roots of conflict are not merely external, scarcity, territory, or competition. They are also internal, embedded in the complex architecture of the human brain. Evolution didn't just shape our hands to craft weapons, it shaped our minds to weigh threats, to form alliances, and when necessary, to eliminate rivals. Anthropologists and evolutionary psychologists have long debated the origins of human aggression. Is it innate, hardwired into our species from the beginning? Or is it learned, an unfortunate byproduct of culture, hierarchy, or civilization? Modern research suggests it's a combination of both. While we're capable of extraordinary acts of empathy and cooperation, we're also wired for in-group versus out-group thinking, an ancient cognitive shortcut that allowed our ancestors to quickly assess who belonged and who didn't. This mental division, once a survival mechanism, can easily become the foundation for conflict. In the harsh landscapes of prehistory, resources were limited and survival was uncertain. Groups that cooperated internally but competed externally stood a better chance of passing on their genes. Over thousands of generations, this pressure selected not only for tool use or hunting strategies, but for psychological traits: loyalty, suspicion, vengeance, and even cruelty. You can see these traits echoed today, not just in warfare, but in tribalism, nationalism, and even sports rivalries. The instinct to rally around a group identity and treat outsiders with distrust is deeply embedded and difficult to unlearn, but it's not all bleak. The same evolutionary forces that shaped us for conflict also equipped us with the tools for peace: language, empathy, social bonds, and justice systems. Humans are unique not because we fight, but because we can choose not to. As we evolved, we didn't just develop better weapons. We developed stories, laws, diplomacy, and morality. We learned to redirect aggression into ritual, competition, and politics. Civilization didn't eliminate violence, it contained it. In some cases, it even channeled it into productive forms, from organized sports to courtroom battles. But the instincts behind it never vanished. They just adapted. This is why understanding our violent origins matters, because without confronting them, we risk repeating them, blind to the patterns that have shaped our species for millennia. From the fractured skull of Cranium 17 to the massacred remains at Nataruk, the story of humanity's earliest violence is not one of glory. It's one of survival, fear, and calculated brutality. Long before the first empires rose or fell, before soldiers marched or borders were drawn, humans had already begun fighting each other, not just as individuals, but as groups bound by blood, identity, and necessity. The discoveries at Cima de los Huesos and Lake Turkana force us to reconsider what we thought we knew about human nature. They strip away romanticized notions of a peaceful, Edenic prehistory and replace them with something far more complex and more human. A species that could cooperate to hunt mammoths, but also coordinate to massacre its own kind. But there's a paradox in this ancient violence. The same brains that created weapons also created art. The same hands that struck in anger could later build shelter, raise children, or bury the dead with care. We are not only warriors, we are builders, thinkers, healers. And while the capacity for violence runs deep in our DNA, so too does the capacity for peace, for restraint, and for progress. If there's one lesson from this journey into the prehistoric past, it's this: violence may be part of our nature, but it doesn't have to define our future. To break the cycle, we must first understand it, truly and without illusions. Only then can we hope to rise above the ancient instincts that once helped us survive, but now threaten to destroy everything we've built. In the dust of forgotten battles and the silence of ancient graves, echoes remain, not just of death, but of choice. And the next chapter in humanity's story will be written not by the weapons we wield, but by the wisdom we choose to follow.